Let me start by telling you a story. This story is that of a mathematician who was serving in the court of an Indian king. This mathematician ends up inventing the game of chess. And the king is very happy with this invention. So he says, what would you like as a reward for this invention? He says, I am a guy with very modest needs. So give me 1 grain of rice for 1 square of this chessboard and double it for all the squares of the chessboard and give me 1 rice on day 1, 2 on day 2 and so on. The king is not very impressed. He says, look, you've made some substantial discovery. Tell me something, ask me for something more substantial. He says, this is all I need. So that's fine. On day 1 he gets 1 grain of rice. On day 2 he gets 2 grains. Day 3, 4 and so on. And lo and behold, after day 32, he's already at 100 tons of rice. It's a pretty big sum, pretty large quantity of rice for a small kingdom that he was in. I want you to guess what would have happened if this had continued for another 32 days. Any idea how much rice this mathematician would have earned? Any random guess? Just take a wild guess. Wild guess. There is. It can be quantified. It's not that big a number that cannot be quantified. It's actually 429 billion tons, which is roughly 500 years of annual production of rice today. 500 years. So the reason I'm telling you the story is that all of us, we all struggle to understand things that are exponential in nature. We just can't understand things that grow in an exponential manner. Just because something looks small doesn't mean that it's going to stay small as long as it's growing exponentially. Right? It's going to become really, really big. If you look at the world of data or the world of analytics or our ability to put the data into good use or to make meaningful decisions out of that, in all of these ways, we have been living an exponential world, right? And we have been in the first half of this chessboard, in this half of the chessboard, where it's still interesting, but not so. But I think right now, we're entering that second half of the chessboard, and things will become really, really interesting now. Okay. Let me back up a little bit and talk to you about how the world of analytics was born. Some of you may have seen this movie, Imitation Game, where this mathematician, right, he created this machine called the bomb, which decoded Enigma, which was basically the reason why Germans were winning the war at that time. Germans had this way of communicating with each other, and the Allied forces just couldn't figure out what was going on. And then at this Bletchley Park, he went and basically put together a team of scientists and mathematicians that eventually cracked the code, and because of which Allied forces could decode the communications and do that. And he could do it with brute force. In brute force, it was millions and billions of possibilities. It would take years and months to decode anything. So they had to decode in near real time. And that's when he built the first computing machine. And that's the beginning, the birth of computing, right? And then at the same, he didn't just do this. Alan Turing also constructed what is called as the Turing test. The Turing test is something very interesting. The Turing test essentially says that the key difference between humans and machines is the ability to think, right? I mean, that's what we've always been told, right? In fact, René Descartes, who's a philosopher I really admire and one of the sort of founding philosophers of modern Western philosophy, right? He said, "I think, therefore I am," and he sort of distinguished human beings and put them in that elite group which can think. And since then, we've always thought that machines will not be able to think. So Turing designed this test called the Turing test. I'm sure some of you would have read it, but it essentially says, imagine that C is on one side of the room, and C is talking to A and B on the other side of them. He can't see them, but he can talk to them. Let's say one of them is a human being, and another is a machine. the day C is not able to determine better than random chance who is the human being and who is the machine, that day we know that the machine is smart enough to behave like human and actually maybe even better than humans. This is a test that he proposed in 1950. Today there are many machines or many kinds of machine and software that can actually beat this test. Though this test is no longer considered the gold standard for figuring out whether machines can think or not. But interestingly, things have moved that far that machines have already gotten that smart. Even if you look at the gap between imagination and reality, that's actually shrinking. This is in 1968, Arthur C. Clarke wrote A Space Odyssey, and he talked about this HAL computer which talks to you and is very smart. I don't know if you've seen that movie. And now we have Cortana and we have Siri and we have Google now that essentially do pretty much have achieved that to a great extent. In 1979, Douglas Adams wrote this book called Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you haven't read it, it's one of the most funniest science fiction books ever written. It's a movie as well, though the movie is not funny as good. But Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy has this concept. He creates this concept called babblefish. The babblefish is a type of fish and this is about interterrestrial travel. And he talks about this concept of babblefish, which you can put in your ear, and it will translate in real time for you. If you're A and B are talking to each other, A can be talking in any language, B will hear it in his or her own language, and vice versa. If two people have babblefish, they can talk to each other, even if they're in different universes or different parts of the universe or different languages and so on. So that's the idea of babblefish. And now we have Google Translate and other translate apps that very much do the same thing. Maybe 2 months ago, I was in Turkey and I was struggling to talk to I never knew that Turkey was so difficult from a language standpoint. I thought they would speak English, but a lot of people who don't. And I was talking to my Uber driver and struggling to communicate with him in English. Then he picked up his phone. I pushed the button and started talking to it in Turkish, and it was translating in real time and talking to me in English, the phone. And then I could actually fully communicate with him. Right? And then I've used it many other times afterwards. But the point is that it's already done. It's the 25-30 years it took, but we have achieved that dream. If you look at Minority Report, the gesture-based computing that Minority Report talks about, it's already real with all the stuff that you say in Xbox and Kinect and so on. What I'm saying is that the gap between imagination and reality is shrinking. It gives you some clue that we are entering that second half of the chessboard, where the innovations are getting bigger and bigger, and they're getting closer and closer to whatever our imagination suggests. In fact, we are consuming, even today, you may not realize it in everyday life, but we are consuming a whole lot of analytics without realizing it. An ordinary man on the street will not be able to realize that there is so much of machine learning and AI and analytics that's going on behind everything that we're consuming today. Right? We talked about the Translate app. If you go to Google search engine and today, for example, ask for red roses, you get a different set of ads versus when you say cheap flowers. Because Google knows that if you search for cheap flowers, you're ready to buy flowers. But when you say red roses, they're only browsing for flowers. So the number of ads, type of ads will change. Because Google understands your intent. Right? Our message feeds and LinkedIn and Facebook, they're getting smarter and smarter so that every single click that you see actually feels clickable because they're so relevant to you. Why is all of that happening? It's all happening because tremendous amounts of analytics is taking place at the back end, and you're using very, very simple interface to consume all of that analytics, right? But we don't realize that. Right? We don't realize that so much analytics is taking place. But while this is going on, in a very big way, in lots of these kinds of examples I spoke about, it's not true across the world. It's not true for most large companies around the world, right? Think of all the major companies that you may have worked for or you would want to work for. Most of them don't really get analytics, right? We have this way of looking at the world where we look at, on the x-axis, we look at how sophisticated the analytics is, and on the y-axis, we look at how institutionalized or how well they use analytics on a day-to-day basis inside the organization. And most companies are here, they are here, and they're trying to move up there, like Google or Netflix and Amazon, but most of them are struggling to get there, right? And basically, as you join organizations and or start your own business, this is what you're going to do. You're going to help companies go from here to there. Right? That's essentially what in some way or the other, if you can do that, that will be very, very useful, because that's the mission every company is on, right? They all understand that analytics is critical and big, but they're all struggling to either use very sophisticated analytics or make it much more systematic. In fact, I would suggest that there are 5 different dimensions on which the world is changing vis-a-vis analytics, right? And I'm going to walk you through each of these dimensions in the next few minutes. I just want to check how much time do I have? Okay, that's good.
1 hour, 2 hours.
Okay, great. So let's start by talking about the dimension of data. Let's say I recently met Nike, so I was just doing this for them at that time. But imagine that you ask this question: who coined the phrase "just do it," which is iconic symbol of Nike, right? And you ask this question to Google and Bing. And there's a way you can actually do that, where the service called bingicon.com, where Bing says, look, my search results are as good as Google, and let me do a blind comparison between Google results and Bing results. Right? So if you go to bingicon.com, which actually only available in the US, it doesn't work in India yet. But let's say you search between, give a search phrase, and you can get these search results, and you can say which one is better. And after five tries, it tells you Google one or Bing one. Right? Ask the question like who coined phrase. You can see that both of them have got the answer, more or less have cracked the answer. Both of them are using Wikipedia to answer the question, but it's click of button, you got the answer, right? So what happens when you run this Bing it on test is that most of the time Google and Bing are 3-2 or 2-3 and so on. They are pretty much neck to neck. So what explains the fact that Google is so much more prevalent in the world? Why is their market share so high, and how will they keep their market share so high? And what are the implications of keeping the market share so high? I asked a friend of mine who used to work for Microsoft in research and has a number of, I think, 250 different patents, including some that he owns with Bill Gates. Right? He told me his interpretation, his secret. He said that, look, for most of the search queries that people ask, right, 99% of the search queries that people ask, Google and Bing will give you very similar results. They're almost equally good, because both of them, their algorithms are equally good. Both of them have great algorithms. They've got great data scientists. They've built all these algorithms. But the real test or the real difference between Google and Bing is on the 1% of queries, the bottom 1% of queries. There, Google has so much more search history over the last many years, so much more data that they've collected on what you like and what you will click, that they're able to tune their algorithms much better. So that's where Google will outperform Bing. And that is a sustainable advantage because of the sheer fact that Bing's market share is low, they're going to have less data. Google will have more data, and the person or the company that has more data is going to win, because both of them have equally good AI, machine learning, data science capabilities and experience and so on. So what am I coming to? That data has become the most critical strategic assets for companies. It has become absolutely critical for success for companies. What are companies doing there to leverage that? First of all, they're storing as much as possible. They're not deleting any information. They're just keeping it there, because the cost of storage has really gone down and can be leveraged. And that means that there's no point in actually deleting any data. Just keep accumulating the data and start to leverage it. And also start to get other kinds of data, unstructured data that's there inside the organization, external data that's available outside the organizations. Put all of them together, because the battleground has shifted to who has better data. Right? It is a big sustainable differentiation between companies, right? And that's what's going on. I'll give you one example of what we did recently. NFL, you guys know NFL football. It's American football, right? We were doing this interesting assignment for a company where we are looking at the NFL video, okay, the last few minutes of the NFL video, and seeing what are the ads that are being seen on the screen at any point of time. On an algorithmic manner, we're saying, okay, there are a bunch of ads across the screen, and we're seeing what are the ads that are showing up, and what is the likelihood that a consumer is going to see that ad while watching the game. And therefore, you'll know whether my ad is actually making money or not. I mean, because eventually you want eyeballs, you want people to see the ads, get influenced by it. Right? You see a Nike ad there, you might go buy Nike shoes, right? So essentially, on algorithmic basis, we're trying to figure out what is the impact of these ads, and if from a video feed, we're trying to understand. New source of data, never been done before, right? People have used other kinds of data to understand marketing effectiveness, but using video to do marketing effectiveness, that's interesting. So whoever brings a new source of data is going to get more effective in the way they advertise. They will know exactly how much to pay for the ad now that they know who's exactly watching it or who's likely to watch it. So that's what's going to happen. We have devices that are connecting us together, generating whole host of data, and people are bringing them together. Those are winning. Let's go to that's the first dimension. The data is a strategic asset. Let's go to the second dimension, which is around real time. And I'll give you a good Google example here. This is something I did about 2 months ago. There was a major shooting in a church in South Carolina. Right? There was African American, basically predominantly African American church, and there was one guy who walked in, basically shot many of them, and then killed. It was a big incident. It was a huge incident. But literally a couple of hours after that incident, I went to my Google search bar, my Chrome search bar, and typed South Carolina, and this was the first suggested search phrase. And this is what Google expected me to search for. So basically, what it means is that Google algorithm has been updated with additional data, and they have now realized that if you say South Carolina, the chances that you look for church shooting is the highest likelihood situation given right now, given what has happened just now. The algorithm has been updated, the model has been updated, the problems have been updated. And a week later, or maybe a couple of weeks later, I searched again, right? When the whole incident died down. It was not maybe 2 weeks, maybe it was 3 weeks later, because this is a pretty big event. And 3 weeks later, when I searched, the church shooting is not there at all. No, it's not suggesting it because it knows that people have stopped looking for it. It's no longer a hot topic. The models have been updated. You know that Uber updates its sort of pricing algorithm in real time to give you search pricing and those kinds of things. Right? The value of analytics that can be real time is very, very critical. This really makes my life so much easier than South Carolina than actually typing the whole phrase. This incremental advantage that real-time analytics provides is huge. But most companies that you may encounter around the world are actually much, much slower. Think of MTNL, for example, they in the building. Imagine how much time do they take to figure out anything and act on it. Probably months, if not years, right? I'm quite sure it will be quite long, right? Think of a company like Coca-Cola, really big company, $50 billion company. But for them, today, if you go and buy a can of Coke, right, the information that you bought it or anybody bought it, or that their sales of can of Coke in Hawaii for today, November 7th, that data will get to them in about 35 to 40 days. That's the time it takes for data collection to happen and to go to them. From there, by the time they process it and do all kinds of other stuff, like eventually decision makers get the information on, okay, how is my sales doing, and then give some location like that. It will be another 50 days. So it could be overall 100 days from the time a consumer buys a product for them to really figure out what's going on. It's really, really slow at this point. Many companies are like this. They're not the e-commerce companies who are pretty much getting real-time data, and some of them are definitely doing real-time analytics, but most guys are not. For them, the important thing is, how do I reduce the latency of the business, right? How do I cut down the time to act from the time a product has been bought or sold or something like that. So this is about reducing decision latency. It's also about putting analytics to use, operationalizing the results. You may build a model. I'm told you guys are building some kind of a churn model right now. Now, I can tell you from experience that operationalizing a churn model is a nightmare. It's really hard. Because you may say, who are the people who are likely to go and leave, let's say, a cell phone company. But you have to put that in a CRM system so that when somebody calls, let's say you are one of the guys who are likely to leave, and you call the call center, they actually are able to put you through to a retention agent. Or they're able to call you ahead of schedule and say, here's an offer for you so that you don't leave. these kinds of things require tremendous amounts of organizational investments to actually operationalize it. It's really hard because all of the data is sitting in so many different places. Even though you build a model and you have provided some insights, by the time it's actually put to use to actually drive decisions, it's hard. And that part is about operationalizing decisions and making it real time. And third part is making it contextual and relevant. So this is so contextual, right? Whatever happened in the last 5 minutes or 10 minutes is used already to update this, right? Imagine you were standing somewhere and doing something right now. Does your phone understand your geolocation? Can it tell you what to do? That's what we're talking about. Okay, so that's the second dimension on which companies are getting better, and whatever you do, if you're able to bring companies more real time, you'll be successful. This is what we just spoke about how happens. Let's forget that. And now I'm going to. It's a good time in this discussion to ask you some questions so that you make up. Okay, let's do that. I'm going to ask you 3 questions and to test you on your analytics skills. Okay, let's start with the first one. Imagine that there is a disease which is relatively rare. Okay? 1% of the population has this disease. Okay? And there is a great diagnostic test available. Okay? And that is so good that with 99% probability, if you have the disease, it will actually give you a positive result. Okay? But there's just a small problem that if you don't have the disease, there's a 5% chance you may still say that you're positive. So if the result came out positive, you really don't know whether you actually have the disease or not. Okay? Because there's a 5% chance that you don't have the disease and you still get the result. Now this is where the questions are. Everybody understood the question? All of you have to answer the question. Okay? The pick. So if you haven't understood the question, let me know right now. Okay. So a friend of yours undergoes this test. Okay? And she finds out the test is positive. Okay? Now my question to you is, what are the chances that this friend of yours actually has a disease? Pick, we call this A, B, C, D, E. How many people, I want all of you to raise your hands for one of the options, okay? How many people for option A? No one, okay, very good. How many people for option B? 1, 2, 3, 4. You have half your hand raised. Can I count you? No. Where are you? How many people for option 3? 1, 2. Okay. How many people for option 4 or D? How many people for 94%? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How many people for option E? 99%. 1, 2. Okay, okay, now about 50% of you have not picked any option. So, can you please tell me what the option is? What if there's another option? Anybody who will guess the answer and explain it. I want somebody to explain the answer. What's your what? A. Okay, you want to explain the answer? I can tell you that it's wrong, so don't explain it because I don't think it will be right. So, anybody wants to explain the option 2, the 17% answer? Anybody who knows and can explain the 17% answer? That's very easy. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, that's a few B's. Okay, that's very good. Excellent. B is the right answer. So anyone, if there's anybody online who can also answer the question, that's great. Or anybody in the room, please feel free.
Base rule.
Yes, but apply the Bayes rule again. How did you get to 70%? Just give me some idea. Bayes rule is correct. You have to apply the Bayes theorem. Yes, go ahead.
I think I could be approximate value.
Yes.
It is like almost 100% chances, but there is a false positive scenario of 5%.
Okay.
So when we reduce the false positive scenario, it comes out to
So, but what's the math? Just give me some math to figure out. So you reduce from 100% to 99% to 5%, it becomes 20%. I don't get that. Good. You're right, but I want to know the right approach to the answer. Anyone can? Do you have any idea? Okay, let me. If anyone will, I'm happy to entertain your response. But otherwise, I'll give you a very easy way to understand this. Let's say there are 100 people in the world. Okay, only one of them has a disease. Right? And let's say 100 people take the test. Let's say 100 people take the test. 5 of them, 99 of them won't have a disease. One of them has a disease. Right? 99 of them, 5% of 99, roughly 5 people will actually get a positive result. And of the one guy who has a disease will also get a positive result with a 99% chance. Right? So we're essentially looking at one positive result which is correct and 5 positive results that are wrong. So it's roughly 1 by 1 plus 5, roughly 70%. Okay? Does that make sense? But the important thing here is that imagine how many doctors actually get this. So a room full of data scientists will struggle with this question. But this is happening every day to us in hospitals and other places where there are tests like these, and doctors are making some huge life-changing decisions on our behalf, and most of them don't get math. Most of them go to do medicine because they don't get math. Right? Maybe some of them do, but a lot of them don't. Just imagine how because most intelligent people also get this wrong. Most people get this wrong. So I'm trying to drive a theme here, and let me get to that. And let me ask you by asking you a second question. This is a very famous, celebrated question. So you may have read it in a book or somewhere. So if you have, then don't answer it. But otherwise, go ahead and answer it. This is about Linda. She's 31 years old. She's single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy, and as a student, she was deeply concerned with the issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. So that's Linda for you. Now I'm going to ask you a question about who Linda may be. What is more likely? Linda is a bank teller, or Linda is a bank teller and active in the feminist movement? How many people for answer A? Please raise your hands. Online as well. Alright. No one. How many people for option B? Okay, we have a consensus. It's option B. Okay, excellent. Okay. Unfortunately, the answer is wrong. I'll tell you why. Yes, if B is right, A is also right. By definition, B is a subset of A. So B has to be more, A has to be more likely than B. It's very simple. But most of us actually, we all fell for the same trap. Right? Which is that you want to, because of what you've read about her, you're trying to understand Linda as a typical person, and then actually it's a low problem. The more conditions you add, the less likely it will be, the more likely you'll be wrong. Right? So that's as simple as that. But again, we make these kinds of mistakes on a daily basis in all kinds of things like marketing, right? We define my ideal customer is 34 years old, has one daughter or one child, and she does this, and you put all these. So there's no such person. Nobody exists like that. But unfortunately, marketing still runs it like that and targets their campaigns like that. I've never understood how these media agencies and marketing agencies, get paid, right? I just don't get that. But anyway, that's a mistake we often make. I'm going to ask you the last question, and this is again not a trick question. None of these are trick questions. Last one is also not. But here's the question: 9/11, September 2011 attacks in the US, in New York. Because of that, 1595 more people died. 1595 additional people died because of the attacks that we have not accounted for. These are not the guys who died on the day or a week later, a month later. These are not the people who got the firemen who got diseases later on and died. No, they were not there at the event. They were not at the scene. These are not the people I'm talking about who were at the scene of the incident. But because of 9/11, very much because of 9/11, 1595 more people died. This is not terrorism, none of that. What could it be? Any guesses? These guys were not connected to the people who were at the event. they were not there on that event, they're not relatives, now this is basically other people who are not connected to the event who died in the next 1 year, they died. No, they were all American citizens. American people, sorry, people in America. Some of them may not be American citizens, but yes, it is directly caused by 9/11, though these are not people who were there at the event or their relatives. These are the people who, additional number of people who died because post 9/11, people stopped flying and started driving. Immediately after 9/11, people basically stopped flying. They all got so scared of flying. The next 1 year, the number of miles driven in the United States dramatically increased, whereas the number of people who are on flights dramatically decreased. In fact, the airline industry went into a huge recession because of that. Right? The airline industry, huge tailspin because of that. 1595 people more people died because, by definition, driving is so much more unsafe vis-a-vis flying. Always has been and always will be, right? Despite all the crashes that we keep hearing about. So, what is the common theme across all these three things? It's that we human beings have huge limitations as people, right? We make lots of grave blunders. We don't get basic ones. We can't figure out. We make lots of irrational decisions like these, and we make these kinds of judgment mistakes all the time, right? So we need algorithms. We need machines to help us, because machines are actually much more objective, much more clear. All these questions, they would have made the right choice. Right? There are a lot of people who are currently protesting against, who believe that driverless cars are not good. But if driverless cars were to be introduced across the globe, and it would save millions of lives. Right? An estimate says that only in the US alone, in a decade, it will save 500,000 people's lives. It's huge, right? But people protest. Anyway, so we need algorithms. So here's an example. Right? Imagine that you, after these sessions, you get out of this office of this place and you actually go for dinner. And you're in Hawaii and you search on your favorite app or search engine the word restaurant. Okay? What should it tell you? Should it understand the fact that you are in Hawaii and in Hiranandani, therefore, and when you say restaurant at a time at 8 o'clock in the evening, it actually means dinner. Maybe it's 9 o'clock for you or 10 o'clock, but whatever it is. But knowing who you are at that time, the app should know that this is dinner time for you. And so when you say restaurant, you're asking for restaurant recommendations. And given that it also knows that you probably like Chinese food, it should say, okay, here are the Chinese options available for you. And also knowing what you typically end up spending, it may suggest that those Chinese options which are close to you, which are probably walkable for you, or if it knows that you are in a car, which are drivable distance from you, and given the weather and there's the context, you might say, okay, these are the three options that actually work for you. Right? Today, none of the apps and none of the things that we use today understand us as well and contextualize and personalize it. But it's getting better. It's getting better. You can see Google now, for example, does a lot of stuff on Android, which is pretty cool. But the idea is that analytics has to become much, much more sophisticated. Right? And this is the way it can become. And it has to also incorporate a feedback loop. It has to learn from every transaction. Let's say last 3 times I recommended this restaurant to you, you didn't go there. Maybe next time I should know that I should not do that. Right? And that real-time feedback loop has to be there. And those kinds of techniques that use information and actually take the feedback loop and get better over time, those are the ones that are actually going to change the world in any meaningful way, right? That's the direction where the analytics is moving, the world of AI. Also, unsupervised learning. You would have learned a lot of supervised learning stuff, which is around logistic regression and decision trees and random forests and neural networks and all of that stuff. Many of these techniques are all very supervised techniques, but the real difficult things that are taking place right now, the real value is coming from unsupervised learning methods, which we are not good at. As so far, there's not that much work that happened in this area. We're still quite rudimentary. As an example, if you take a picture of this room and say, identify all the objects in this room, that's a pretty hard problem today. It's a very hard problem because You're not giving them any, it's an undirected, unsupervised learning problem. You're trying to figure out what are the objects in this room, what is of interest to me, right? If you were to, let's imagine that you were to know, if I were to recommend to you what is relevant to you right now, if for that you need to do unsupervised learning as well. Okay? That's where a lot of work is taking place. So we've so far covered 3 of the 5 dimensions on which analytics is evolving. Right? This is a very important dimension and usually quite ignored, especially in the classroom where we never really talk about it, right? Which is around institutionalizing analytics. Right? And I'm going to explain give you the story. This is the story of the city of London in 1846, I think, 1846, when there's this. London as a city had become very big at that time. There were 3 million people in London at that time, which is the largest city in the world by far. And what was happening was that people were just dying. They were dying because of diseases. And people started to feel that city-based living is actually not sustainable, because when people live so close to each other, diseases spread very quickly and people die and so on. And they also thought one of the major diseases there was cholera. Cholera was people thought was actually spread by air. The cholera meant bad air, and they thought that was airborne. Whereas there was a scientist called John Snow. He guessed that maybe waterborne, and he wanted to prove it. So what was going on at that time was Londoners were actually they were drinking the water from Thames every day, from the Thames River, and they were also dumping all their waste and sewage and all kinds of stuff. They were dumping it in the river as well. And they never realized that dumping the sewage in the river and then drinking from it is causing all these issues. And our friend John Snow, Dr. John Snow, he wanted to actually establish to them that it's waterborne. So he looked at, there was one case that happened when a young girl died somewhere near this pump. And what he did was, he actually carefully, went into the city and he risked his own infection, could have died, but he collected data on all the people who were dying. And he mapped them. All the black dots that you see are deaths from cholera, right? And the green ones are all the pumps. This is a big pump here. Right? And he said, look, this pump is the cause of the illness. This is the place this girl died, right? This is exactly the house where the girl died. And the people who are closer to the pump, there's a much higher, death rate here. My submission to you is that this is being caused by water. We must clean up the cities. He went and tried to convince the local authorities that this, with data, with analytics, with intelligence and all of that stuff, right? Back in the 1850s, this is pretty sophisticated analysis and visual analysis. They did all of that stuff. And he tried convincing the local authorities that please change. But it took London another 12 years and hundreds of thousands of deaths to figure out and agree with John Snow. And then finally they started cleaning up the rivers. And then, for the next 150 years, London has been much, much safer as a city, right? And city-based living is not sustainable because of that, because people understood that. Huge. The impact of what John Snow created is huge, but it took him 12 years. How much patience do you have to convince organizations to be more data-driven? Try with MTNL, right? For starters. It takes time. It takes a long time for organizations to get convinced and do this stuff. Driving that cultural change in the organization to become more data-driven and use analytics for all the decisions is a very long path. And that's as you join organizations or run businesses, you will see that you will encounter that. Right? I mean, things are changing, and now hopefully it's changing rapidly. So it will no longer be an issue by the time you start doing it. But at least for the last 15 years that I've been building this business, this is what I've been encountering. This is what I've been doing. Okay. So this is a way. This is a P&G is a very large consumer goods manufacturer. I'm sure you 4 billion people on the planet use some of their products every day. So you must have used something or the other, Pantene or all kinds of other, Gillette, Razor, anything you use, that's all P&G. And this is how they have institutionalized analytics inside their organization. Right? They have these war rooms that they call as business spheres. Right? These are all sort of big screens that surround them. They have these meetings which are all paperless. They can see these visuals on the screen or on the big screens there, and they can drill down to any problem that they're currently facing and come to a decision as to what to do with that in real time. using this kind of a business sphere. There are 53 business spheres around the world, and we basically run all the analytics behind this, but then they use that to make all kinds of decisions. That's how they've institutionalized data-driven culture within P&G. To get that right, you need to create a multidisciplinary team. Analytics is not one domain right now. People have to come from multiple domains to crack the problem. People have to understand business. Certainly, they have to understand business. So I just saw this note yesterday. It was pretty interesting. I found it interesting that ISI Calcutta, IIT Kharagpur, and IIM Calcutta have all come together to launch the first 2-year program in analytics combined with these 3 programs. I thought it was very interesting to see that because it's a recognition of the fact that multiple disciplines have to come together to create anything in analytics system. Because you need business expertise, you certainly need analytics depth, and you need technology. They have to all sort of come together. And certainly in business, you need multiple disciplines within business. You need people to understand behavioral economics and consumer behavior. You need people to understand a domain, telecom domain or financial services domain and so on. So you have to put a very interesting team together to actually create that kind of solve those kinds of problems and institutions. And importantly, you also have to systematically experiment. You have to systematically experiment because you want to test and learn everything. Right? As an example, if you go to an Amazon shopping cart, you will see the prices of things that are there in your cart will change. Every time you go there, a few prices change. I believe that Amazon runs a very sophisticated pricing experiment to try to understand what kind of prices nudge what kind of consumers to buy. They are trying to understand that. So that's a systematic experiment they're doing at scale because they're doing over millions of consumers, hundreds of millions of consumers with millions of products. Right? So the trial is something that we have built in that space for systematic experimentation too. The next example I have, the final dimension, we've discussed 4 different dimensions. The final dimension is really the dimension of disruption. Because across the board, companies are being disrupted as we speak. Right? New players are coming in and trying to take away their lunch. And imagine if you're Shop or Stop, what you've been witnessing for the last 3 years is just carnage, right? Because today, Flipkart sells more than Shop or Stop and all the next 10 physical retailers put together in the apparel space or any other space like that. They have really completely usurped the space, right? So that's going on. What's happening in the world of TV, for example, is that internet companies like Amazon and Netflix have been winning TV awards. I mean, this is a interesting series, Amazon original series called Transparent. Very, very interesting. House of Cards, I'm sure some of you have seen it or have heard about it. They all won many Emmy awards. Both of them have won several Emmy awards in the last 3 years. So internet companies have actually done that because they have used the data. Netflix, as an example, measures and monitors everything that you do with Netflix. Every time you pause your show, watch it again, rewind it, do anything you do with it, it picks up and calls it an event. And they store about 100 million events every day and use all of that information to better understand what do you like and what you don't like, what you not like for their audience. Their audience is American audience, but they're studying their American audience and figuring out what to put. For example, when they created House of Cards, they had the right recipe of how much sex and how much crime and what star cast to put in for the American audience so that they can enjoy it. And finally, they created a great TV product. Right? So that's the idea. Analytics is entering the tradition. Of course, the traditional questions is anyway analytics is taking over, but even strategic questions, product development questions are now being answered through analytics. It's becoming important in a very, very different way to make disruption happen or even prevent disruption. As an example, in the financial services space, this is an interesting chart I picked up from a research firm. If you look at Wells Fargo as a big global bank, and if you go to the home, this is the home page. For each part of the home page, these are the kinds of companies who are trying to take away that part of their business. All these are startups. These are all some kind of startups or the other who are trying to take their business away. Right? This is the P&G disruption chart. For each of the P&G product that many of them you use, there are some company or the other who are trying to take their business away. Analytics can help in actually preventing those kinds of disruptions from happening, or to make those kinds of disruptions happen. As an example, we work with to understand Dollar Shave Club, this this company is actually trying to disrupt many shaving and razors companies by actually doing a subscription service for shaving, right? And we actually used Visa credit card data to figure out who are these kinds of customers who buy from Dollar Shave Club and understand and help this shaving company to make and prevent this disruption from happening. Okay, so to summarize, these are the 5 dimensions on which analytics is evolving and changing the world. And whatever you are doing, if you pick one of these dimensions, or if you're building a business, if you're doing a startup, you should leverage one of these sort of trends and build a business around that. Or if you're joining an organization, this is the 5 dimensions on which you can actually make progress as an organization in the field of analytics. So this is what I had in terms of telling you about analytics. I mean, if you're interested, I can talk a little bit about my thoughts around entrepreneurship, but I'm happy to stop here and take your questions. That's all. I mean, why don't I give you a quick, sorry, can you just pull it up again one more time? I'll just give you a quick overview of Fractal, because I think you might want to be interested in knowing who Fractal is and what I've been doing at Fractal. So Fractal is an analytics firm. We are 15 years old as a company. We were founded in 2000. We work with some of the major companies around the world. We work with about 50 companies in the top 200 companies around the world. We are their strategic partners for analytics. We do all kinds of analytics for them. We've got 850 people across the globe. We're present in about 100 plus countries because of working with global companies who want our services in these countries. We've served 100 plus countries, but we have about 12 offices across the globe. And what is most important is that there are 3 things that we think we bring to the table, which is important. One is that we can solve good analytics problems. And one thing I will tell you as you are sort of doing this program is that fancy techniques is one thing, but it's all about business problem solving. Analytics is about business problem solving. If you can understand and formulate the problem the right way, most of the time I see analytics fail because people have never understood the problem very well. They really haven't spent time to articulate the problem statement, to understand what exactly to build. So you have to understand the business issues, like a doctor and a patient. This is what I keep telling our Fractal people who we hire and train, that as an analytics practitioner, you're a doctor, and everybody who visits you is a patient. The patient may say anything, like I have headache, for example. You cannot say that here's a pill for the headache. That's not what you do. When somebody says I have a headache and give me a pill, you ask questions. You ask questions to understand what could be happening. You diagnose, right? It may be anything right now. It could be a brain tumor, or it could be indigestion. It could be something totally different. It could be migraine. It could be any number of things that could be happening. By asking a series of questions, and you understand what the issues are, and then try to solve for each of them, and you develop some hypotheses. And for each of the hypotheses, you might build models to validate them, or run those models to validate them. But if you don't get that, you cannot be successful as an analytics practitioner. The second is that you need software. You have to build. It's not just about building models, but you have to, most of the time, if you think you're good at building models, your job is at risk, because frankly machines will build those models automatically. A lot of the work that human beings are doing today in the world of analytics will be done by machines in the next 5 to 10 years. So you have to build software that can build these models automatically rather than just build these models. Right? It's not a services model, it's an IT plus services model. And finally, as far as people is concerned, think of this industry as an industry that's changing so rapidly that whatever knowledge you pick up at this institute, by the time you graduate, some of it will be already irrelevant. And in 3 years, almost half of it will be irrelevant, because things are already changing. It's moving really fast. Half-life of knowledge is 3 years or less. So you have to have the hunger and the appetite to learn new things, because the ability to learn is what will distinguish you rather than your skills. Skills are important, but skills will get outdated. The ability to learn is what will distinguish you from the other people. Okay, so and that's what we believe. That's the kind of company we're building. So that's all I had. I'm happy to take your questions. Yes.
Since your products in a lot of verticals, is there like a common platform on which specialized products for different verticals?
You're talking about Fractal?
Yes.
Yes, we have we have 4 products, and we are building a 5th product as we speak. One product is called customer genomics. If you have a presentation, just quickly. So one of this customer genomics product, which essentially does real-time machine learning for companies and tells you what is relevant to you right now. And it actually tells you, it understands customers with a machine learning approach. It actually dimensionalizes the customer. This is across industries, so it can be financial services, insurance, healthcare. In many industries, we do that. Then we have a product called Trial Run, which is a systematic experimentation platform. Retail industry is currently using it the most, but it can span across a whole host of industries. That's the question you're asking, right? So this can span across a bunch of industries. I don't know if I have. Decrypt is not one of the top 4 products, but is another product that we have built, which is a text classification algorithm. It actually learns and improves over time using new data. So it's actually an AI-based solution, and it classifies text. So if you give it the string of text, it can extract features of this from the string of text and keep learning new things. So we use it for cleaning up data like merchant data or address data or and many other situations like these. We use that to do data preparation and data cleansing. It uses several AI techniques. I don't think I have the other product logos here, but we have for this we use a product called Concordia. We have a data harmonization platform called Concordia. What it does is it takes very messy data from various third-party data sources like Nielsen and IRI and puts it together and creates clean data for you. It's like a water filter. Like you get dirty water, you get clean water, and then that in between we have this thing called Concordia. It is mostly in the consumer goods industry, but it can span across other industries. We've used it in consumer goods and pharma industries so far. And what have I not covered? I have not covered something called as CAE, which is the centralized analytics environment, which is essentially a platform on which we perform all the analytics. That's another IP. And we are building a new product these days, which we're launching in the next 2 weeks. It's called Wink. It's codenamed Wink, and it means what you need to know. So WYNK. So what it does is it tells you what is relevant to you right now using unsupervised methods. So these are the kinds of products we build. They're all across industries, though we may have used it in a few industries right now. They're by definition, they can be used across a whole host of industries.
I have a question. How do you ensure quality in an analytical service? Is it some standardized like CMM or ISO?
Good question. There's one sort of process standard that's there called CRISP-PM, which is like really old now, almost 16, 17 years old. It's not been updated. It was initially built by a consortium of analytics players back in 1998 or something like that. So there's no process standard like the CMM or CICM type of standard here. But the general principles of review and design and project management, they are valid to deliver quality in case of analytics as well. So that's essentially what it is.
Do you see in future any standardized process?
Good question. No movement has taken place in this part. But you're right that the biggest fear I have about analytics is that most of the analytics that is produced is actually wrong. Because when you're tinkering with data, you can make so many mistakes in what you're doing that your conclusions may be totally invalid. You may have brought data from future into current and got some insights which are no longer going to be useful when you implement those models. You could have framed the problem wrong. You could have just messed up the data. Some data may be missing. It could be so many different issues that could happen when you're actually building models. Like there's no process for consulting today, right? How do you get business consulting right? There's no good process document to ensure that business consulting is always accurate. Similarly, this is even messier. This has business consulting as a technology, and this has analytics. Three things that are coming in, and you could make errors in each of them. So it's definitely one of the big dangers in analytics, and the only way you can ensure is review. That's the only way you can get that right. Yes.
I remember that I was asking that what will be business scrutiny chemicals, oil and gas,
Yeah, let me answer that question. I don't know firstly. I don't really understand these industries too well. But we've interacted with oil and gas industry, for example, and so if you think of oil and gas industry, both upstream and downstream, right? Upstream has a lot of research around geological data and stuff like that, where you might want to understand where is the next of potential oil discovery, right? But you can actually, there's a tremendous amount of data analysis that takes place in the oil and gas industry to figure that out. It has billions of dollars of value, but we don't do much in that space. But in the downstream area, where they actually sell fuel and lubes and those kinds of things, it's pretty much like any consumer goods company. So, we met with ExxonMobil, which is the largest company in the world in oil and gas, and they were saying, look, we really want to get your consumer goods expertise because that's what we want to use in our business. So they have brands, they have products, they have to distribute, and they have similar challenges to any FMCG company in India. So in that sense, oil companies can be thought of as both research and upstream as well as the downstream, and they go with it. But chemicals, and these kinds of industrial goods sectors, I really don't understand them very well. But the fact of the matter is, all these industries have lots and lots of manufacturing equipment. They're all talking to each other now. There's a tremendous amounts of data getting collected. So there's definitely a lot of value in improving operations, in avoiding dangers. Those kinds of industrial analytics is there, and Internet of Things, those kinds of places there is potential. But frankly, I don't understand it too well.
So, Mr. James asked, what are your biggest challenges?
Okay. Take this jacket off. Okay. So yes, my biggest challenges. So yes, I can tell you my story. So we started the business in the year 2000 in analytics, and we set up this business in India. So our goal was to serve Indian clients back in 2000. So to think about it today, even today, analytics is very, very nascent in India. So thinking of 15 years ago, when first of all analytics was very nascent, and India was definitely not using analytics anywhere. At that time, trying to convince Indian companies of analytics was an incredibly big challenge. It was quite foolish, to be honest. I would never do that again. But I'm much wiser for having done that. So we tried selling the idea of analytics to all the big banks in India. We succeeded. We worked with Hindustan Unilever, we worked with ICICI, and a whole bunch of banks. Almost every major bank in the country, every major telco in the country, every major FMCG company, MNC FMCG company we worked with. But it was extremely challenging. It was very hard trying to sell the idea of analytics. They not only paid us very little, they made us work triple as much as we committed, and they ended up sometimes not even paying on time. It's just quite hard to get going in the Indian market. So that would be the biggest challenge. That would be my biggest challenge. Okay. That probably is the biggest challenge that I faced as an entrepreneur. Then the second thing was that we went to some of the major companies around the world, and we started talking to the likes of Citibank and Visa and so on in 2-3 years after we started. And we saw that most of them said, look, we already have a very, very sophisticated team. We have 150 PhDs who do all this stuff for me every day, so how are you guys going to add any value? And so we had to actually take a lot of these sort of head-to-head challenges, where we said, okay, we'll build a model, you also build the model. If our model is better, then you pay us, otherwise you don't have to pay us. And we won many of these kinds of challenges. So we had to do a lot of bravado to actually to go and to do that. Even getting the first engagement to work with anyone, there's always a problem that you're the first guy in the field. Everybody wants to know what is your experience. Nobody wants to test you. Nobody wants to be the guinea pig for you, right? They all want you to have established this, and you need experience. So we had to break through that cycle as well. So we had to find a client who said that, look, we'll first prove to you that we know what we're talking about. We know analytics, and we can do all this stuff. And once we prove to you by writing a research paper on this topic, once you agree with us, then you can give us your business. And that's how we started our first engagement that was with ICICI in India. These are some of the very, very early stage challenges where we just had to establish ourselves, and we had to, in a very nascent market, get the first engagements, talk to companies which were, on paper at least, much more sophisticated in this space, and therefore we had to show them that we could be better. We didn't have any challenge in hiring talent at that time, or ever since as well, because the talent has been relatively easy to find. Not easy to find, but definitely talent has always been attracted to Fractal. So it's been relatively easy to make very, very good people to quit and join Fractal. That was not a challenge which many startups do face. That wasn't one of the challenges we faced. And midway through, in the last, there are so many other challenges that we've had, but which I can tell you, I can write a whole book on it. But yeah, this was probably the biggest challenge in the first couple of years of Fractal.
What's your advice for the entrepreneurs who want to now invent? And how you should first start with using a team?
Yeah, the world has changed a whole lot since analytics is no longer such a nascent industry now, and there are a lot of people who know what they're doing in this space, which wasn't the case back when they started. So things would be somewhat different, but maybe some commonalities. One thing I would very strongly suggest is you have to be super focused. If you're trying to start something in the analytics space today, you got to pick a very, very clear problem that you think if you solve will be huge value and hasn't been solved so far. You have to pick a place where you can truly make a difference. If you are incrementally better from what exists today in the marketplace and you are not focused, there's no way you can get it. You will just not survive. Because you may think that there are no other companies in this space, but there are 10 other people working on the same area at the same time. It always happens that way. The day you launch, you realize, oh, there are 10 other guys who also launched something similar in the last 1 month or launching in the next 1 month. So this has happened so many times. I've tried to counsel many entrepreneurs over the years about these kinds of topics, but wisdom is very hard to communicate, and people do end up going and making the same mistake. But if I could advise, it would be pick a very, very focused area, build a product, and let it solve a problem that you believe hasn't been well solved before. It should not, at least in your mind, it should not be incremental result. It should be a breakthrough product. And then by the time there's always a gap between what your vision was and what you end up achieving in reality. So there's, first of all, that will happen. It will not be as world changing as you thought when you started out. And second is that there will be other people in the space. There will be you'll find it difficult to convince people. So there's of course a big drop off from changing the world to where you eventually will land up. But still, you land up at a good place. At least if your focus and vision is big and focus is sharp. People who are not focused, who want to build, let me build a services company, let me build a product company, but to fund the product company, let me build a services company. A lot of people start like that. They think that they want to build a product, but they'll start by saying, okay, let me serve a few clients, do some stuff, pilots for them, and then use the money to build a product. The worst idea ever, because it never actually takes place. You will never ever get time. If you're building a services business, you will never get time to build products. It just won't happen. So these are some of the classic traps. As far as the analytics business is concerned, if you want my general entrepreneurship advice, I'm happy to give that as well. Is that what you want? I have a couple of slides. I'm happy to share that with you, which will be right after this. So if you're thinking of starting a business, I have a few questions for you, because these are the traps that most people fall into when they start a business. Right? First, so you have to start the business for the right reason. The first thing I would tell you is that you'll make less money than if you join a job. Okay? Let's be clear. Ask Rupesh, he was sharing with me that it's difficult to make money as an entrepreneur. It is hard. Adjusted for risk, adjusted for probability of success, you will actually make less money than a job. Unfortunately. Yes, it's like just because Shah Rukh Khan is extraordinarily successful and has $50 million, every guy who comes to Mumbai to be a movie star is not going to be a movie star, right? So entrepreneurship is somewhat like a movie star business. There'll be Shah Rukh Khan and Hrithik Roshan and all these kinds of heroes and Deepika Padukone or whatever. There'll be stars, but for every star there are 1,000 examples of people who don't succeed, and we just don't read about them. So we keep thinking that, oh, it must be easy because he got it, he did it. So I'm just like him, I can do it too. So it's not. So just be ready that it may not be. You may not make as much money in entrepreneurship as others. So I'm sorry, I'm not trying to discourage you from entrepreneurship, but I'm going to be giving you some facts. Okay. The second reason why people start business is because they think that I'll be my own boss. I don't have to work for anybody, right? I'm the king, right? The fact of the matter is that you will be absolutely bottom of the food chain when you start a business, because you have to sell to everybody in the world. Everybody, including your landlord, your spouse, your employees, your investors, your clients. Everybody will be sitting on your head, because you are the one trying to convince everybody else that this is a reasonable business. They all have other options. You're the only one who doesn't have options. Right? So that's very critical. That you don't start it because you think you want to be independent and you want to be your own boss. That's a very big trap. The third one is that you'll have no control over your time. The third reason why many people start businesses, may not be you guys in this room, but a lot of other people midway through their career, they feel that I want to balance my work life and family life, and I want to get more control over time. Let me start a business, quit the job because I have to work 40 hours a week there. But once you start a business, you'll be working 100 hours a week. You have zero control over your time. Everything. It'll just totally suck the life out of you. Everything is sucked in. Right? So if these are not if you're ready for all three, right, and you still think you won't start a business, then you're in the right place. You should start a business because you think that there's no other way you can live. You have to be that desperate for starting a business. You have to have that kind of motivation, because life will deal a lot of hard knocks at you, 100%. I guarantee you that. There'll be a lot of hard knocks. There's no story like this, right? The stories are all like this. Everybody. It's just that we don't know. The biggest success in the world, if you really go back and read these stories, there'll be a lot of failures in between. It's just that you don't realize it. You have to read their autobiography or biographies to figure that out. But there is no linear or exponential story of success in entrepreneurship. They're all ups and downs. So you have to be ready for the volatility. You have to be able to stomach that volatility as an entrepreneur. Second is, you need patience. First one is, have you burnt your boats? I don't know if you know this. The Spanish general who invaded Mexico, right? His name was Cortez Hernandez, right? He landed with I think a very small troop. I think there was 20-30 people. He landed on the shores of Mexico, and and Mexico was like a very big country by those standards in the 17th, 18th century when he landed there, and he wanted to conquer that. And his soldiers were all very scared once they landed. They knew that there was a big population out there, and how will these 30-40 people, how can they conquer a country with very little ammunition, nothing, right? So what this guy did, the first night they were sleeping, is that he actually went and put all the boats on fire. He burned all the boats. So the soldiers knew that if they have to survive, they have to survive here, otherwise anyway dead, right? They don't have any options of going back. And then they survived and they eventually conquered Mexico. Right? They did many things, and it's a very fascinating story. But in some ways, you have to burn your boats, and it's not hard. It's hard. It's for anyone. You might want to keep your options. Maybe I can go back to a job. I can do something else. Those options. The moment you have options, that means you are almost guaranteeing that you will fail, because those options will actually turn out quickly. So that's fine. Second thing is that is cash flows. Right? I mean, if you have to last a distance, you have to manage cash flows. There are many people who have great ambitions and great vision, and just fail because they just ran out of money. A lot of great companies just run out of money, and they're not able to raise money. If you look at the last one quarter, I think there are maybe a dozen to 20 different failures in the world of internet businesses, right, across the US and India, and almost 50-60% of the cases would be of companies that had potential. They were really good, but they just couldn't raise money. Their cash flows were messy. They were spending more money than they were getting, and eventually they went out of business because they didn't have liquidity, not because they were not good businesses. So that's important that you manage cash flows. So you have to, whether that means raising money at the right time or managing your operational cash flows. Your business characteristics may be different, but you have to manage the cash flows. And third is about perseverance, right? There will be a lot of hard knocks and a lot of places where you completely lose your belief that this is not going to work, it's not going to happen, and it feels like the end is right there, right? And it's always darkest before dawn. So there are many such dark nights that you'll experience, and you have to just get out of that and just wake up every morning and go back to work and get stuff done. So it's really hard in that sense. You have to be ready for that. Hopefully your journey is going to be a lot smoother, right? But if I've known a bunch of entrepreneurs and my own journey, it's very, very rarely have I found a story which is just, I started and everything was great and I became a billionaire overnight. I mean, it feels like that, but it's not like that. And they say that it took me 30 years to become an overnight sensation. It's like that. Right? It takes a long time to become an overnight sensation. Look at the world of analytics. 15 years now, everybody is hyping this industry. But imagine in 2005, just nobody believed in whatever we were doing. It's just there's nobody who believed in it, right? So you have to beat the odds. You have to sort of sustain, and that's hard. Survival is eventually you have to survive. It's like you're on a desert island. You take care of your survival, and eventually find a rescue boat. But survival is critical, and for that you need cash flows. You need to persevere. Third thing is dimension about learning, right? You have to be passionate about your business idea. Don't start a business because you think it will make money. You think that there's nobody in the space. This looks like a cool idea. Let's start it. Because by the time you launch your product, like I was saying earlier, also there will be 10 other people who are also thinking of the same idea. So very cool idea, great idea, stuff like that is not necessary. It's necessary but not sufficient. It may not even be necessary. It's definitely not sufficient. You need to definitely be passionate about your idea, because when other people don't believe you, they think it's nonsense, you still have to sort of keep up at it. So you have to have a really strong belief in what you're building that will outlast any set of buzzwords that come. Because whatever buzzwords are coming this year and last year will not be there the next year and the following year. They will go away, and you still have a business to run. So if you're chasing the latest fad, then you will not be building a business. So that's that. So you have to be passionate about that. You have to be able to transition to an entrepreneur. I mean, we've discussed some of the dimensions around that, but essentially, you have to sell to everybody. You have to, as a leader, you have to, two critical things you have to do. You have to have clarity. Where am I going? You have to give that clarity to the whole world. You have to give that clarity to every single person that you're working with. This is where we are going. Because you are leading a whole bunch of people towards somewhere, right? Whatever that bright future that you're building towards. You have to give that clarity every single time. You may have lots of doubts in your own mind, but you have to give the maximum amount of clarity that's possible at any point of time to the rest of the people. Just remember that a lot of people are in it because you are there in it, and you have to keep giving that clarity. The second thing is optimism. Despite whatever is going on, you have to believe and have to continue to give people the optimism that yes, it's going to happen, it's happening, it's almost about to happen, whatever, right? You have to continue to do that. You are the cheerleader for the entire business that you're building, and you have to continue doing that. And last is that you have to face rejection every single day. There will be whole 50% of the, if you have really great idea, most people in the world will think it's going to fail. I mean, that's when it's a good idea, right?
It's a good idea.
If an idea that everybody thinks is a good idea, it's probably a highly commoditized idea where 100 people other people also doing, and you will probably not succeed. It's very rarely does an idea that everybody likes be a successful idea. You have to pick an idea that you believe, and you're willing to face rejection. You'll face rejection from everywhere, from clients, from people, everywhere. You have to be strong in that. So it's a pretty hard journey, and it is there for a few people. And so if you are one of those few who can answer yes to all of these questions, then entrepreneurship is the right business, right thing for you. And as you take off, as you start this business, you must make sure that you have your whole family with you and friends with you, because you will need a lot of support from everybody. what happens when you start businesses is that people just get isolated themselves. They lock themselves into a room and think that, okay, I will get out of this and idea will boom, come out and win. That doesn't happen. You need to make sure that everybody is invested in your idea, at least emotionally, right? Your spouse, your family members, your friends, because you will need to leverage many of them to be successful eventually, right? You need their support in the times of difficult times. So you have to onboard them. So you have to talk to them, get them. Just don't do it without telling anybody. Bring them on board. Bring them, tell them what you're doing, and seek advice from them. Many of them will say, "Don't do it." That's a different matter. You can still go ahead and do it, but definitely they should be ready. They should know and be willing to support and respect your decision. Just you might start a business and there may not be any salary for quite some time, right? For the first year or 2 years, you may not be able to draw any money because you started a business, you haven't raised funding. People think that they can raise funding in 3 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, but all of these estimates are optimistic. It might take you much longer to actually raise money and start. You probably have. It's better. I would advise you to have 18 months of fuel left in your tank before you start this journey, right? So that's that. So, and when you're building a team, like they say about Abraham Lincoln, that he built a team of rivals. All the people who fought him in the elections and elsewhere before, he actually put all of them together to create his first team. Because he believed that if he brings people who complement him, who have different ideas from him, and they can still lead to results, right, and conclusions and move forward, and he can lead them, then he will definitely not make mistakes, right? So be ready to put a team together that complements you. Just don't get people who just exactly like you, because then they will not add as much value, right? You have to bring in, if you are great at, let's say, how to deal with people, but you're not very good at, let's say, how to deal with issues and project management, or you're not very detail oriented, get someone who's detail oriented in your team, so that you can actually do something. You are a very strong tech guy, definitely try to get a guy who's really strong in business, because eventually you'll have to commercialize whatever you're doing, and having a partner like that will be very important. So build a complementary team so that you can actually, there's much more chance of success if you have a complementary team. That's all I had in terms of some advice if you're starting a business. Any other
Why
questions?
did you start actually?
Big mistake.
Make less money. That is not.
I would say, I started because, I felt I was compelled. I thought I want to start a business. I saw people like me who were starting business. I thought I should start. And that was probably not a good reason, to be candid. But I think what we did was that once we found the initial hurdles, we quickly got together and said, what are we really passionate about? What is it that we believe we can do and we can change the world in? And we couldn't really figure out how it will make money. When we thought of analytics, there was no other company like us in analytics space that we could say, okay, let's copy these guys and let's just create a better version of this, right? Like Flipkart saying, let me copy Amazon and do a better Amazon from there. That's great. They had a business, they had a sort of a company that was inspired to be like, and could build it and even probably better it. But we didn't have that. So we didn't know how we would make money. But we knew that this is something that is meaningful. We knew that it's going to be pleasurable because we understand and love math and we think we could do some of that stuff. We knew that it was meaningful because we knew that it's important to change the world. And it was an area of our strength. So my sort of 3-point formula for anybody is these three: pleasure, meaning, and strength. Right? Does it give you pleasure? Do you find it enjoyable? Second, is it meaningful? Is it changing the world in some way, or do you feel like it is value adding to the world in some way? In your own way. You have to find it. It doesn't have to be somebody else's way. But do you find it meaningful to do that? And third is, when you're doing it, do you lose track of time? Can you spend hours and hours and not feel tired or not still feel energized doing something? If you found something in life which gives you all three, that's the sweet spot for you. That's where you have to focus. Whether it's entrepreneurship, job, whatever it is, right? You pick that place where gives you pleasure, meaning, and strength. And I believe that's analytics for me, and that's how I started.
But in 2000, nobody was thinking about analytics. We were all talking about BI reporting and all that stuff.
Yes.
So where you got this analytics idea?
I mean, if you actually look more closely, there were people who had already understood the analytics, who had understood the value of analytics, and I mean, all you have to do is just research space, and you start finding, oh, there are so many companies I didn't even know existed. I mean, today we're trying to do something in the healthcare space, as an example, and we thought healthcare, this is so nascent in the specific area which we're doing. I'm not sharing deliberately what we're exactly doing because we're still not ready to talk about it. But once we started researching, we realized that there are so many companies in this space. Exactly what we want to do, there is somebody, there's this company in Boston doing that, there's this company in Singapore doing that, or whatever. Start figuring out that actually there are places. It's just that it's not risen to the state of collective consciousness that when TV channels start talking about it, that day you know that it's way beyond its hype cycle. Right? It's just hyped up right now. But the industry has the most potential when nobody's talking about it, because that's when it is, right? So analytics was certainly in that space. Once we started looking at it, we saw the applications of that in the areas of credit scoring, in the areas of collections, in the financial services, in the areas of marketing, consumer behavior. We started looking at this is very cool. I mean, this is math changing the world, right? And making much better, helping companies understand their consumers better, or making better decisions, reducing their inefficiencies. We saw this is looking really good. We should do it. And we just didn't know how to commercialize it because there was nobody else we could copy. But we did know the potential existed because there were so many examples that we could find of where people were already beginning to use analytics. So it's not that we created the industry. The industry was there in some shape or form. But this business model, this nature of serving clients, there was nobody, and we were the first to start that.
I have a very simple, I think, since the time you mentioned about the Cartesian rationalist approach, Descartes approach. See, I'm just thinking, is the analytics is far away from the rationalist approach? That means you had an IIT, if I have understood it correctly, that is great. That answers, that satisfies me, because why you went for that? Why you went for business and that? That is very difficult. Leaving a job and everything. But you said that what was the Cartesian assumption? As a mathematician, you said that I exist, therefore I can, I think.
I think therefore I exist.
Same thing.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is that is there any contradiction between the analytical approach and the rationalist approach? He is basically a rationalist.
Yes.
Now, what is it the further approach of rationalist becomes dialectic? You see, because unless you really clarify yourself in terms of, unless you read philosophy, unless you understand what is empiricism, what is realism, what is surrealism, nothing. I think analytical tools can't be applied. This is my assumption. And if it is so, then why you find a contradiction of the rationalist approach with the analytical approach, or it's not?
I mean, given that human beings are fundamentally irrational, I think a rational approach may not work as well, because I think we have to understand the irrationalities of human behavior as well, and some of them are predictably irrational, but there's some that are not. So I think when you think, I may not have understood your question very well, but when you start thinking of AI and areas like those, I think we are definitely transcending the purely rational way of understanding anything, right? I mean, you're definitely you're adding all the irrationalities of behavior as well.
We used to ignore irrational. We used to think that we were rational.
Yeah.
Now coming back to this one, you see, we mentioned about Singapore. I had a discussion with somebody in Singapore very started. So he was, they are working on medical analytics. So there's a big team. And in medical analytics, he was telling me that look, the basic assumption is that there is some jobs which is not capable for human being to do. And therefore, we have to take it over and machines will perform. This is what is going. If that be so, I think the world will finally become away from, I think the human interventions will be less and less and less.
That's true.
Now, what will be the future look like according to you? suppose a stage will come when all these people will be where you will do business. How you will conceive it?
So I think in the foreseeable future, let's say 20 years from now, 25 years from now, it's definitely there's this, the world is split on this question, but there's definitely a very large percentage of the world that believes that AI will take over the world, and we don't know what is going to happen after that, because in the next 15-20 years machines might become as intelligent as human beings, and once they become that, if you throw more software, more hardware, more computing power at them, they can become infinitely more intelligent than human beings. And once that happens, then AI may just take the world over. In fact, somebody like Elon Musk, who's the founder of SpaceX and Tesla, right? He thinks AI is evil, and he's actively telling everybody don't use AI because AI will destroy the world. And there's that one sort of camp in the world. And there's another camp that's led by this guy called Ray Kurzweil, who runs the Singularity University and he's a big thinker. He thinks that AI will fundamentally be good. But in both their scenarios, AI will do a lot of the stuff that we're currently doing. Data scientists and this model building that we're doing will potentially be done by computers and by AI. But if that's maybe 20-25 years from now, and we don't know, it's speculative. There's a half of the world which believes that it will never come because problems are so complex and everything is so exponential. Every problem is so exponential in its sort of complexity that machines will not be able to take over, and we will need human beings to handle the irrational, to handle the complexity, cut through dimensionality. As an example, today, if I look at this room and understand all the objects in this room very well, or visual processing, for example, my visual processing is far ahead, or anybody's visual processing is far ahead of computers. It's way behind, and that's because we have a very special apparatus to do this visual processing, and computers just are not wired to crack that problem today. So there is a need for human beings as well. But in the next 20 years, however, it will be about man and machine combination, human and machine combination. And how do we get that collaboration to work more effectively? The guys who get that right, they will succeed. The people who want to do all AI will not be successful because it's still far away from that vision. But if you think of AI plus people, I think we're quite close to getting there in terms of getting much more sophisticated. I don't know if I.
Coming back to you, I think basically what you are doing, and I think probably this is my thinking also, that bimodality is going to happen, and complex process. So to give you an example, so most of the brain surgeries are going to be performed by machines.
Yes.
And that is, and
yes.
other surgical interventions or other where there is a judgmental things are required or can be conceived by me. So analytical tools will be.
Just imagine that as an example, right? I mean, I'm sure you guys must be drinking the IBM Kool-Aid in any case. But so I'll give you an IBM example. They have Watson, right? Not Watson Analytics, but Watson, the system, right? Where one of the things they're doing is to look at medical diagnosis. That's one area where it appears that they've made a lot of progress, right? At least from what I read in publications. And what it is doing right now is to provide doctors with enough intelligence. If I'm a doctor right now and you come up with some kind of a symptoms that I don't understand very well, or I understand but I want to leverage all the research that exists in the world. If there is a system that actually is reading all the research papers in the world, doctors don't have time to read all the research papers. There are, I think, 4,000 research papers or something like that published every day, or it's a crazy number of medical research that's getting published every day. I can probably read 5 or 10 papers in a year, or maybe 20 papers if I'm really prolific. But how will I make sure that all the research that's available, all the examples that are available, I am able to leverage all the intelligence and give you the right assessment of what is going on in your life. So doctors are required because I don't think anybody can trust a machine to do a diagnosis right now.
But neither we can trust the doctors because they are so averse.
But the combination is great. That you can't trust the doctors because doctors are not necessarily progressing at the speed.
They don't understand.
They don't, but the ones who understand, at least some places, that's where it's actually beginning to work.
I would add to that. I was reading on McKinsey, doing research on the same subject, and they're saying that what are the processes which can be automated, what are the things which are required for the human innovation. So the area where they are thinking about is creativity and innovation. Is the area which is still human is required. And there are certain areas like what you talked about, like the research papers or probably let's say legal. There's a lot of documents which they have to do. These are the things can be automated.
Yeah. The jobs are actually, counterintuitively speaking, the jobs that are least likely to be outsourced are people, things like, the job of a waitress is probably quite safe for quite some time, and you really don't want to be served by a robot coming and giving you dishes, right?
But coming back to you, I think you are assuring them at least 20-25 years they will not have problem with their jobs.
As long as they're actually, they welcome AI and actually building the AI, they will be very, very secure. And even if you don't, if you're a provider of talent to this industry, as all of us are, then I think this future is secure, quite secure for quite some time. You just have to make sure that the talent is something that's learning, because what you've learned right now is not necessarily going to be relevant 5 years from now.
How do you test originality of your candidates?
I'm sorry?
How do you test the originality of your candidates? Originality of your talent?
The candidates that I interview for Fractal, hiring in Fractal, I have a very simple way of doing that. I ask them a question that tests first principle, and never people can give a lot of jargon and throw buzzwords at you, and the more buzzwords somebody is throwing at you, the less confident I am. I mean, more confident I am that person is not good, because if you're really good, you should be able to simplify your thoughts and present them in a way that everybody understands. But the way I test it is by asking a question that's very, very simple, but test people's first principles. One of the success principles for hiring at Fractal would be understanding of probability. Like the question I asked here, the medical diagnosis question. I'm sure many people will get that wrong in an interview situation, because in an interview anyway, IQ drops to 20 points because you're nervous and you're thinking all other things. So we have to adjust for that. But I asked a question that is a very simple probability question. That's which tests you on Bayesian theorem, and which is based on first principles. It's a very simple question, like there's a house, there are 2 kids in that house, and one of them, you spotted one girl, one of them is a girl. What are the chances the other one is a girl? Questions like these, very, very easy questions like these. On a conceptually, they'll be very easy. But if you don't know the first principles of probability and Bayesian theorem, Bayesian stuff, you will miss it. You will not be able to answer it. And that is my best test to understand if they can think fresh originally. Second is around asking, this is the standard sort of way in which consulting firms do these kinds of testing, is to ask questions around estimation, which just test structured thinking. And you ask questions like, estimate the number of barbers in Mumbai or something like that, which is not very hard if you just break the problem down and think of in different ways. So, but that tests people's structured thinking. That's also another. What do you want? We want people to be. There will be new situations, new problems, and they have to think on their feet and whiteboard and get to a solution. That's what we need. For that, we need structured thinking. So that's another way to test people's, ability to put themselves in new situations and think in a structured manner. So those are some of the tests we think. I mean, it's hard, I think, to test creativity in a test, and people have tried various things, but I don't necessarily do any of that. So I don't have any tests for creativity. Yes.
I have a question. While dealing with your customers, how do you take up the issue of data security? I think that's a great big question.
Yes, it's a massive question. I can give you the 2-minute version or the 2-day version if you. It is that. It's tough, but firstly, I mean, most of the time we work on clients' data at their client premises, so they're inside their firewall. So we are not necessarily. The more data travels, the more chances that it'll be duplicated or travels it goes away. So we try to work on problems directly on client's own system so that the security is most protected. Second is, of course, we have very rock solid secure systems. We have enabled it in such a way that people can work from anywhere, but they will not be able to download any data or anything like that. So you can work even from your smartphone or from your laptop. You can work on the server. All the data is always on the server, never on any machines. You log into a machine, you log into the server and work on it, and therefore the chances of it being leaked are very low. The other thing is emails and internet access itself is dangerous, and email is also dangerous. And we want people to be free and have unrestricted internet access and email access and all of that stuff in the office. At the same time, we want to protect data. It's a very hard problem to solve. So what we've done is we've created two environments within each of the systems where there's an Ubuntu environment which is basically all free. It's completely, internet is free, everything is free in that. So you can all tab into it and do work there. And you can come back into your other Windows environment where everything is locked. And that's where you can actually work on the client work. So by what we've ensured is that people have this Fort Knox like security in terms of data, but people are not, and also have freedom to access the internet and do research, whatever they have to do to access the internet. So those are some of the things. But you can ask us here to give you the two-day answer to this question.
I have a question regarding and what the policy is of dependability on reliability on once someone got a work or any kind of services which you cannot do. How do you tackle that? Have you get any redundancy in that?
You're talking from
depending on some of the services.
Just give me one example so that I can understand what you're saying.
Let's say if I wanted to make an application for my product, and depending on some other people or a freelancer,
Okay.
if he hands me out for that, I have to deliver that somewhere else. So how do you tackle that?
See, I mean, you have to pick carefully and spend a
trust issues, you can say.
Yeah, you have to pick carefully and you have to spend a lot of time and that's the idea of creating redundancy and backup. It's very hard. You don't have resources to do that. You don't have the money and the time to do. You have to take some bets and to pick the right people. If you have infinite money and time, etc., that problem doesn't exist. And you can create all kinds of structures, but you are essentially taking a bunch of bets, and you have to make them right, and you have to invest your time to get them right. I mean, I don't know if there's any way to build up redundancy or on your suppliers in such a way that you don't fail. You have to inspire your suppliers so that they don't fail and they understand your mission. Most of the time, it's about because they're a small company, they may not care for your business, but they can care for you. If you are able to convince them how important this is, how critical this is to you, and how critical to the world it is, and talk to them and build a relationship, they will do it because they feel like it. It may not be. People don't do things just because it's making more money or less money. They do things because they feel they like somebody or like to help someone. So you have to bring that about to them. It's just because you're paying them a supplier money doesn't mean that he or she or they will do great work. And just by paying them more also won't ensure that. But if you get them involved and you inspire them, it does work. So that would be my suggestion.
Financial sector and financial analytics. So, what do you expect from a fresher and who's aiming for a career in financial analytics? So, what category do you see? What characteristics do you see?
It's the same as any other sector. I mean, which I discussed, which is ability to think on their feet and think basic structured thinking and understanding of probability, which is very critical to look at. Second is attitude. Like I said, I was talking about the doctor-patient analogy, right? So you have to have the expertise and the orientation of a doctor to understand, diagnose, and do structured thinking, right? Which the doctors don't hopefully do, right? Then the second part is also that you are, let's say in our business at least when we hire, we have people who are essentially serving clients. Right? So we need people who can also serve in our industry. So we also look for people who have the attitude to serve and serve clients. Right? People who are too arrogant or cannot have attitude. We do not hire those guys because we have to make our clients successful. That's the only way we become successful. So we also look for that characteristics in people, whether they'll help us in making our clients successful and have that kind of service attitude. Third is that of course we look for integrity, basic integrity. I mean that's anywhere there in any kind of place. So that's basically it. I don't see what else we look for. We look for raw material. We don't look for your financial services experience. Great if you have it, and if you have it, we'll definitely test it. But that may not be. It's like I said, you have to be able to learn. We will definitely test your attitude to learn and learn new things, and your interest and how you work on your interest to learn new things. But what your current skill sets are, great. It's good, it's a plus, but it's not necessarily a deal breaker for us whether we hire somebody or not. Any other questions?
How does Visa monetize on this data? How does Visa monetize on this data?
Visa monetize its data.
They have the biggest data set.
Yeah. So I gave you one example of how Visa is monetizing the data. Like I was saying, we use it to understand Dollar Shave Club, who's spending on Dollar Shave Club, and so Visa data could be used for understanding some consumer behavior like that. Their data can also be used to just understand macroeconomic trends and what's going on, because they are sitting on 50% or more of credit card data and a very large percentage of debit card data. So they have a very good handle of how the world is doing, how the economy is doing, way before other people get to know. So they definitely can use it. There are people who have used Visa-like data or banking and credit card data to also bet on stocks. I mean, you get slightly more updated information on how a company is doing based on how much sales are happening. And if you have a big portfolio of cards, you actually can get a very good handle on how the business is doing, and people have actually done proprietary trading based on the information coming out of their spend data. People have done that, and people have sold the data to various kinds of third parties to leverage that as well, without obviously by still keeping the confidentiality aspects of it there, to direct marketing, for contextual marketing, and those kinds of areas as well where they will do. They have Visa as a loyalty program and so on as well, where loyalty solution as well, where they use some of the data to send real-time messages and real-time offers to people, contextual real-time offers. So that's some of the way they're monetizing data. So they're sitting on a gold mine, and they can build billions of dollars of business, of revenue on that data, but it's not necessary that they're doing all of that today.
I feel data is also the reason for the failure of your model. So how you are relying on the data, and how you are validating this data, basically the finance data, create dummy data which is cause the failure of your model. So how you are validating this data?
How do you validate the
Validating this data is correct, or it's not a dummy data or fraud data.
I mean, that is part of the job. I mean, you have to. Yeah, garbage in garbage in, garbage out is very, very common, and you have to make sure that you have the right data and the data is accurate. You run lots of sense checks on the data to understand whether it is right or not. You start looking at some portfolio trends or across time and across parts of the business, etc., and you start saying, does it agree with my experience, or does it agree with the MIS that's been generated before, or something like that? So when you start doing that, you get a good sense of whether the data is accurate and useful or not. There's no perfect way to ensure the data is 100% accurate. You can never be sure, but you can run a lot of sense checks to catch what could be wrong in the data. And finally, I mean, you have to validate the models actually in out of time. Places, right? I mean, you have to run experiments, you have to run validate it, so that if you're making a major decision of changing, let's say, an existing model, you have a scorecard to determine something, and then you're changing it to a new one, you tend to do a champion challenger or something like that, or some way to test out it in smaller places, and only use it for the big decisions only after you're confident that the models that you built are correct from and data is correct. So you have to do anyway those kinds of validations in actual reality, but data you can do it through some sense checks and running some portfolio analysis and portfolio analytics. Yes. Yeah, that's the first thing you do when you get. The first thing you do is to understand the business problem, certainly. Define the business problem and understand the business problem, understand exactly the approach that you're going to use. And the next step is to actually explore the data in all its entirety. Depending on how much time you have, sometimes you don't have the luxury of time, and sometimes you may know that data is clear this, and you just, for example, let's say you're using credit card transactions, now that you're on Visa and other kind of credit card transaction data. Let's say you're using raw transaction data. You can easily quickly run some basic MI on what's the total transaction volume every month, okay, and see does it tally with the business MIS that's produced and what that company is already reporting as their transaction volume. If it's matching very, very closely, you know that data must be right. It's very hard for the data to match month on month exactly to what it is while the data is still wrong. It's very, very unlikely. So you know now that you have enough to say the data is correct and you can move forward. So you have to do some of that stuff. But you should do that. It is certainly important, and I've seen many projects fail because they have data wasn't validated at the time of building the model, and some data was missing or incorrect or flawed, etc. Yes.
Do the telecom operators in India have welcoming sort of nature for analytics technology?
Telecom providers in India?
Do they have welcoming nature for these analytics and fields? Do they approach these analytics or they go for manual? Like there's a lot of analysis in these.
They all are using analytics in some shape or form. And they are all using analytics in some way or the other, the telcos. And we started working with Tata Indicom back in 2002 in India. But they've not been a great success. Then we worked with Airtel in 2006. So clearly they've all been doing some analytics for 10 years. So I have not talked to them in a long time. So my guess is that they would have evolved quite a bit in the use of analytics. Yes.
They are big in analytics is big in India. Airtel is using this IIS for their needs of analytics.
Yes. They're using analytics in some way or the other. It may not be in all places and not as many ways as they should, but I think they all understand the value of analytics. And where the biggest use for analytics in telcos is, but is not currently being leveraged, is just all the location, other kinds of data that you're getting. Yes, customer lifecycle management and customer offers, etc. But the big source of data that all telcos have is your real-time location information history for the last any number of years. They must have deleted a lot of it, but that is very, very interesting data that they could monetize outside. Some of that they could start using. They will know exactly where you live, what you do. They have a full understanding of your life more than you can imagine. But today they don't use much of that. Like Uber CEO was saying that if we release our data, he was threatening some journalists that if I release the data, many of your marriages will end because we know all your affairs and all of that stuff. Same is true for telcos. They can do that.
Sir, globally, what is the success rate of analytics project?
I have no idea. No clue. I can tell you that almost everything we have done has been successful in some way or the other. Some have taken much longer than we expected to. And I was giving the Tata Indicom, I was telling him, it was in 2002. We built a great churn model. We built a model that could predict who's likely to churn away from their cell phone service 13 years ago, right? It took us 6 to 9 months to implement the models inside the telco, inside Tata Indicom. It was just one circle. This was just an AP circle. They're not like the whole world. And they were very small. They had only some 3-4 lakh subscribers. It was very small, very tiny telco. But to get their systems right so that they can implement these models and make decisions in the call center and then proactive retention, figure out the offers, it took them a very long time. So I don't know whether to call it a success or a failure, because they started in 2002, maybe they would have bought some of this stuff in 2003 and 4. They must have thought that they actually were using a part-time, some summer training to first doing the churn model. He said, summer training, said, just go to build a churn model. He spent 3-4 months and he said, no, I can't do this. Let me find a professional firm which can actually do this. 2002, right? And he found us and we built it for them. So they had zero understanding of how serious it is, how important it is, how to do it, what were the implications. So they struggled to actually implement it back in 2002. So yeah, there will be many such examples of people who have built but may not be using the insights. Whether you might call that a failure. There will be a lot of these types of failures. But if it is built right, implemented right, it will always be successful. It will be 100% successful. Failure is about execution rather than the value, the fundamental value of analytics. It's hardly ever the case that analytics cannot add value. It's just that execution is sometimes hard inside some organizations. Yes?
How can analytics add value to the public transportation system?
Okay. I'm sure you can answer this question better than I can. I mean, I'm sure you can think Uber and other cats like that. Then you can run your imagination wild. Everything is possible. So. Anything else? Okay, thank you folks. Great to be here.